They laughed when I reached for the keyboard, called me just the IT girl in front of everyone. But when that plane started falling from the sky and panic filled the cabin, I typed 6 characters that made every badge-carrying agent freeze, because some codes aren't meant for technicians, they're meant for ghosts. This is the story of the day I stopped being invisible, the day I learned that some things you can bury, but you can never kill. And the day a cabin full of cruel strangers discovered that the person they'd spent an hour humiliating was the only thing standing between them and a 10,000-foot drop. If you love stories about underestimated people getting the last word, hit that like button and subscribe. You won't want to miss how this ends. They say you can never truly escape your past, that no matter how far you run, how much you reinvent yourself, there's always a part of you that remembers who you used to be. I used to think that was just something people said to make themselves feel better about their mistakes. But now I know it's the truth, because 6 years ago, I was someone completely different. 6 years ago, I wore a badge that meant something. I carried a gun that I knew how to use. I walked through airports with purpose, with authority, with eyes that never stopped scanning for threats. I was Federal Air Marshal Reina Delgado, and I was good at my job, really good. But that life ended the day I made a choice I couldn't take back. We were on a routine flight, or what should have been routine. Intel suggested a potential threat on board, and my partner and I were monitoring a suspect. Everything happened so fast. He reached into his jacket, I saw the motion, my training kicked in, and I fired. 2 shots. Center mass, textbook, except he wasn't reaching for a weapon. He was reaching for his insulin pen. He was diabetic. He was just a scared man having a medical emergency, and I killed him in front of his wife and daughter because I was too well-trained, too quick, too certain. The investigation cleared me. They always do. Justified use of force, they said. Split-second decision, they said. But his daughter's screams? Those don't go away just because a report says you followed protocol. I handed in my badge 3 months later, not because they asked me to, but because every time I stepped onto a plane, I saw his face. Every time I reached for my weapon, my hands shook. The panic attacks started small, just a tightness in my chest during briefings, but they grew into full-blown episodes that left me gasping for air in bathroom stalls. I couldn't do the job anymore. Not like that, not when I'd lost all trust in my own judgment. So I walked away from the only career I'd ever wanted, from the team that felt like family, from the version of myself I'd spent years building. And I became invisible. That's how I ended up working IT support for charter aviation companies. It's funny, really. I went from protecting people at 30,000 feet to fixing their Wi-Fi at 30,000 feet. From carrying a Glock to carrying a laptop bag, from being called Marshal Delgado to being called the tech girl, or sometimes just, hey you. I chose this job specifically because it kept me around planes without the weight of responsibility. I could troubleshoot routers and update software and stay in the background where no one noticed me, where no one expected anything from me, where I couldn't hurt anyone. Most days it was exactly what I needed. Quiet, simple, safe. I'd board these private charters with my toolkit, fix whatever needed fixing, and disappear before anyone really registered my presence. I became a ghost in my own life, and honestly, for a while that felt like exactly what I deserved. The guilt was still there, always there, sitting heavy in my chest like a stone I'd swallowed. But at least I wasn't making life or death decisions anymore. At least no one's life depended on whether or not I kept my nerve. I told myself this was better, that I'd found peace in the ordinary. But the truth is, I was just hiding. And the universe has a way of finding you, even when you're trying your hardest to stay lost. The flight started like any other. 12 passengers, all wealthy, all important, all heading to some investor summit that probably cost more than I made in a year. I boarded with the ground crew, carrying my toolkit and laptop bag, wearing jeans and a company polo shirt that was 2 sizes too big. Nobody looked at me twice. That's how it always went. I was part of the furniture, just another service worker there to make sure their luxury experience went smoothly. And I was fine with that. Preferred it, actually. But then I met Thorne Ashwick. He was exactly the type of man I'd learned to avoid. Mid-40s, expensive suit, that particular brand of confidence that comes from never being told no. He sat in the main cabin like it was a throne, barking orders at his assistant Brielle, who hovered around him like a nervous bird. When the Wi-Fi went down 20 minutes into the flight, he didn't press the call button. He snapped his fingers at me, literally snapped them like I was a dog. "You, tech girl, fix it, now." Not a please, not even eye contact, just a command issued to someone he considered beneath him. I swallowed the heat rising in my throat and stayed professional. This was my job now. Smile, nod, troubleshoot. I knelt beside his seat to check the connection, and that's when Brielle leaned over with this smirk on her perfectly painted lips and said, loud enough for others to hear, "Did they hire her from a YouTube tutorial or something?" The cabin filled with polite laughter. The kind that's not really polite at all. I felt my jaw tighten, felt that old instinct flare up, the one that used to make criminals think twice about testing me. But I buried it, breathed through it, kept working. When I asked Thorne to restart his device, standard protocol for this kind of issue, he looked at me like I'd just suggested he jump out the emergency exit. "Do you know who I am?" His voice was rising now, echoing through the cabin. "I don't take orders from people like you." The way he said it, with that dismissive wave of his hand, like I was dirt on his shoe. Brielle jumped in immediately, sensing blood in the water. Maybe if she actually knew what she was doing, we wouldn't be having this problem. More laughter. Someone in the back was filming now, phone out, capturing my humiliation for whatever social media audience found this entertaining. I fixed the Wi-Fi, did my job perfectly, but it wasn't enough for Thorne. Nothing would have been enough. He accused me of incompetence, of wasting his precious time, demanded that I be removed at the next stop. And then Brielle, sweet, vicious Brielle, knocked my toolkit off the seat. Tools scattered everywhere, screws rolling down the aisle, my laptop sliding under someone's feet. "Oops," she said, examining her manicured nails. "Maybe you should stick to simpler jobs." The laughter was louder this time. Genuine, mean. I knelt down to gather my tools, hands shaking, feeling every single pair of eyes on me, feeling small, worthless, invisible in the worst possible way, and in that moment, kneeling on that cabin floor, I thought about who I used to be, about the version of myself who'd stared down armed suspects without flinching, about the woman who'd commanded respect just by walking into a room. That woman would never have tolerated this. But she'd also killed an innocent man because she was too confident, too quick to act. So I stayed on my knees, picked up my tools in silence, and swallowed every ounce of rage burning in my chest. I told myself this was penance, that I deserved this. But God, it hurt. The turbulence hit without warning. Not the normal kind that makes drinks rattle and nervous flyers grip their armrests. This was violent, deliberate, the plane lurching hard to the left like someone had grabbed it by the wing and yanked. I was still gathering my tools when the pilot's voice came over the intercom, and I heard something in his tone that made my old training snap to attention. He was trying to sound calm, but there was an edge there, a tightness that screamed danger. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation. Please remain seated." That's when I saw them stand up. Two men, both in business casual, both passengers I'd barely noticed during boarding. Marco was tall, angular, with movements that were too controlled, too precise. Dev was shorter, stockier, carrying a laptop bag he now opened with steady hands. No panic, no hesitation. This was planned. Marco pulled a gun from his jacket so casually it took a full second for the other passengers to process what they were seeing. Then the screaming started. High-pitched, terrified, the sound of people who'd never actually faced real danger before. Dev moved to the cockpit door, typed something on his laptop, and I watched the pilot's face through the small window go from confused to horrified. They'd hacked the flight management system. Remotely. Completely. The plane was no longer under the pilot's control. Dev's voice cut through the chaos, cold and businesslike. $50 million wired to an offshore account in the next 30 minutes, or we turn this plane into a very expensive missile. There's a shopping district below us with about 10,000 people. Your choice. Thorne was the first to break. The man who'd spent the last hour treating me like garbage was suddenly on his knees, hands clasped together like he was praying. "I'll pay. I have access to funds. Just tell me what you need." His voice was shrill, cracking, all that arrogance stripped away in seconds. Brielle was hyperventilating into her hands, mascara running down her cheeks in black rivers. The other passengers were frozen, some crying silently, some staring at their phones like they could somehow call for help at 30,000 feet. The plane began to descend, not a gentle descent, but a steady, unstoppable drop that made my stomach lurch. Through the window, I could see we were losing altitude fast. 2,000 feet, 1,800. The shopping district Dev mentioned was visible now, tiny buildings growing larger by the second. That's when Josette, the flight attendant, tried to be a hero. She'd mentioned during boarding that she had basic security training, and I could see her calculating, trying to find an opening. She lunged for Marco while his attention was on the passengers, but she wasn't trained for this, wasn't fast enough. He caught her mid-motion and shoved her backward with brutal efficiency. Her head cracked against an armrest with a sound that made me flinch, and she crumpled, blood seeping from a gash above her eyebrow. The cabin erupted into fresh screams. Dev barely looked up from his laptop. "Anyone else want to play hero?" 1,500 feet now. I could see individual cars in the parking lots below, see people walking on sidewalks who had no idea a plane was about to turn their afternoon into a nightmare. My heart was hammering, but not from fear. From something else, something I'd buried for 3 years. Recognition, training, purpose, every instinct I'd spent years suppressing suddenly roared to life. I knew what Marco was. I knew what Dev was. I'd spent 6 years studying body language, threat assessment, tactical response, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that we had maybe 2 minutes before this plane, and everyone on it became a statistic. The question was whether the ghost inside me could wake up fast enough to matter. I stood up slowly, not rushed, not aggressive, just a steady rise from my knees with my hands visible. Marco's gun swung toward me immediately, his finger resting against the trigger guard. Professional, controlled, ex-military probably. I could see it in the way he held himself, in the micro-adjustments he made to keep both me and the other passengers in his sight line. "Sit down," he said, voice flat and final. But I didn't sit. I met his eyes instead, and something passed between us. Recognition, maybe. Or warning. "I can help," I said, keeping my voice level, almost casual, like we were discussing the weather instead of mass murder. Brielle's head snapped up, mascara-stained face twisted in disbelief. "What can you possibly do? You can't even fix Wi-Fi without—" I cut her off without looking at her. I said I can help. There was something in my tone now, something I hadn't let out in 3 years. Command, authority. The voice of someone who'd spent years in situations exactly like this. Dev laughed from his position at the cockpit door, but I caught the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "You? The IT girl who spilled her tools all over the floor?" He was trying to reassert control, to put me back in the box they'd all shoved me into, but I was done with boxes. "Let me try to unlock the system," I said, taking a single step forward. Marco tensed, gun rising slightly. "If I can't, you lose nothing. You're on a timer anyway. $50 million doesn't transfer itself." I was gambling that their plan required them to actually receive the money, that crashing the plane was a last resort they'd prefer to avoid. Dev considered this, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. 1,000 feet now. Through the window, I could see people in the parking lot looking up, pointing. Finally, he nodded. 2 minutes. Touch anything except that keyboard, and Marco puts a bullet in you. I moved toward him, and with each step, I felt something shifting inside me. Muscle memory, training, the version of myself I'd tried so hard to kill coming back to life. I reached the laptop, and my hands hovered over the keys. The flight management system was locked behind Dev's interface, but that didn't matter. I wasn't here to hack anything. I typed 6 characters. Simple, precise, deliberate. Skywatch 6 Tango. Dev's face went white. Actually white, like someone had drained all the blood from his body in an instant. That code wasn't in any hacker's manual. It wasn't something you could Google or buy on the dark web. It was a federal emergency beacon, hardwired into a classified frequency that only a very specific group of people knew existed: active and former federal air marshals. The moment I entered it, every agency within 200 miles received an alert: hijacking in progress. Plane compromised, position locked and transmitting. It was a silent alarm that couldn't be stopped, couldn't be traced back, couldn't be undone. What did you just— Dev lunged for the laptop, but 3 years of sitting behind desks hadn't erased 6 years of combat training. I blocked his reaching arm with my forearm, redirected his momentum, and drove my elbow into his solar plexus with surgical precision. He folded like paper, gasping, and I swept the laptop away before he could hit the ground. Marco swung his gun toward me, finger moving to the trigger, but Josette, bleeding and dazed but conscious, stuck her leg out at exactly the right moment. He tripped, stumbled forward, and I was already moving. I caught his wrist mid-fall, applied pressure to the exact nerve cluster that makes fingers go numb, and the gun clattered to the floor. 45 seconds. That's how long it took to subdue 2 armed hijackers. 45 seconds for 6 years of federal training to override 3 years of hiding. Marco was face down on the cabin floor, my knee pressed between his shoulder blades, his own zip ties securing his wrists behind his back. Dev was slumped against the galley wall, still struggling to breathe, similarly restrained. The gun was in my hand now, safety on, held with the kind of casual competence that comes from thousands of hours at the range. The cabin was dead silent, except for the sound of people breathing too fast, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. The pilot regained control of the plane, pulling us up with a stomach-lurching climb that had never felt so beautiful. We leveled out at 5,000 feet, and I could hear him on the radio coordinating with air traffic control, his voice shaking with relief. The fighter jets appeared within minutes, 2 of them, flanking us like guardian angels, escorting us to the nearest airport. I watched them through the window and felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Not pride, exactly, more like recognition. They were doing what I used to do, protecting people who'd never know their names, never thank them properly, never understand what it cost. When we landed, the tarmac was flooded with vehicles. FBI, ATF, local police, federal agents in suits and sunglasses who moved with that particular efficiency that says they've done this before. The plane's door opened, and Agent Caney was the first one up the stairs. I knew him. We'd worked 2 operations together back when I was still Marshal Delgado. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. 2 subdued hijackers, me standing there with a gun I'd clearly taken from one of them, passengers huddled in their seats like trauma survivors. His eyes met mine, and I saw the moment recognition hit. Marshal Delgado. He said it loud enough for everyone to hear, and I watched the name land on the other passengers like a physical blow. Didn't expect to see you here. Thorne's face did something complicated. Color drained, then flushed back, his mouth opening and closing like a fish drowning in air. Brielle looked like she was going to be sick, one hand pressed to her stomach, the other clutching the armrest so hard her knuckles were bone white. The passenger who'd been filming earlier suddenly became very interested in his phone, deleting something with frantic swipes. Agent Caney moved into the cabin, directing his team to take Marco and Dev into custody, and then turned back to me. Want to give me the short version? I handed him the gun, grip first, and walked him through it. The code I'd entered, the takedown, the timing. He listened with the focused attention of someone who knew exactly how many things could have gone wrong, how many lives had been balanced on a knife's edge. When I finished, he nodded slowly, then raised his voice again, addressing the cabin. 6 years in federal service, 12 tactical operations, 4 commendations. You saved a lot of lives today, Reyna. The formal acknowledgement hung in the air like an indictment. That's when Thorne found his voice. He stood up, stumbling slightly, words falling over themselves. I didn't know. I'm so sorry, I didn't realize who you were. I never would have. I held up one hand, and he stopped mid-sentence. You didn't need to know who I was, I said quietly. You just needed to treat me like a human being. I walked past him without waiting for a response, past Brielle, who was openly crying now, past all of them. Agent Caney followed me down the stairs, and behind us, the cabin full of people who'd learned exactly how much their cruelty could have cost them sat in stunned, guilty silence. The footage went viral in less than 6 hours. The passenger who'd filmed me being humiliated had caught everything. My hands shaking as I picked up scattered tools, Brielle's cruel smile, Thorne's dismissive wave. And then, in stark contrast, those 45 seconds where I became someone else entirely. The takedown, the precision, the absolute control. Someone edited it together with the audio of Agent Caney saying my name, my rank, my years of service. By morning, it had 20 million views. By afternoon, Thorne's company stock had dropped 18%. Brielle was fired before she even made it home from the airport. The internet, for once, had chosen the right side, but I didn't watch the videos, didn't read the comments calling me a hero or demanding apologies from people who'd never apologized sincerely anyway. I turned off my phone and sat in my apartment for 3 days, trying to figure out who I was now that the mask had been ripped off. Josette found me at a coffee shop near my place. She had butterfly stitches above her eyebrow and a bruise blooming across her cheekbone, but her smile was genuine when she slid into the seat across from me. "You're a hard person to track down," she said. We talked for an hour. She thanked me, which felt strange because I'd spent 3 years believing I didn't deserve anyone's gratitude. Then she asked the question I'd been asking myself. "Why didn't you ever say anything? About who you were?" I stirred my coffee, watching the cream swirl into patterns that dissolved as quickly as they formed. "I wasn't running from who I was," I said finally. "I was trying to find out who I could be without the badge, without the gun, without all the weight of what I'd done wrong." Josette tilted her head. "And did you? Find out?" I smiled, but it felt sad. "I'm still figuring that out." Agent Caney called 2 days later. Not a social call, an offer. They wanted me back. Not full field duty, not the way it was before, but a position that made sense for someone carrying my particular brand of damage, consultant work, training new marshals, teaching them not just the tactics, but the judgment, the restraint, the weight of every decision. Part-time, on my terms, with mandatory counseling that I should have started 3 years ago. I sat with the offer for a week, turned it over in my mind, examined it from every angle, tested it against every fear I'd been living with. The truth was, I didn't need the badge to have worth. These last few days had proven that. I'd saved those people not because of what I used to be, but because of what I still was, deep down, beneath all the guilt and hiding. But I also didn't need to keep punishing myself by staying invisible. There was a middle ground, a way to use what I knew without letting it destroy me, a way to help without carrying a gun, a way to be Reina Delgado without becoming Marshal Delgado again. I called Caney back and accepted. The first flight I took after everything was different. I boarded as just another passenger, no toolkit, no laptop bag, no company polo. The flight attendant asked if I needed anything, polite and professional, treating me like every other person in every other seat. "No thank you," I said, and meant it. "I'm good." As the plane climbed above the clouds, I looked out the window at the endless sky and felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Not peace, exactly, not yet. But maybe the beginning of it. They didn't know who I was. The passengers around me, the crew, the pilot, none of them knew. And for the first time that felt like freedom instead of hiding. Because I knew who I'd been, who I'd become, and who I was still learning to be. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who save us. Sometimes the person you mock, the one you treat like they're invisible, is the only thing standing between you and disaster. Kindness costs nothing, but cruelty? That debt always comes due. I learned that I didn't need a badge to have value, and I didn't need to hide from my past to find peace. I just needed to figure out who I was when no one was watching, when no one expected anything, when the only person I had to prove something to was myself. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that everyone you meet is fighting battles you know nothing about, smash that like button and subscribe for more true stories about everyday heroes who refuse to stay down. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever discovered that someone you dismissed was so much more than you thought? I read every single one and I want to hear your story. Thanks for listening. And remember, you never know who's sitting next to you. Treat people with kindness, treat them with respect, because the person you're looking down on today might be the person who saves your life tomorrow.